actually existent. Ask me about Latin. The only Latin I know is 90 words. Ladies and gents, good evening at home. I hope you can hear this. We're having a few technical problems. Torquil can't make it today. In fact, I'm the only committee member who is here today, thanks to the plague. And we managed to scrape together. Oh, nine people we have now. I'm going to be quick because, on top of everything else, I've managed to leave behind the power supply to my laptop. So when the internal battery runs out, the broadcast will stop. So just a few things I want to mention. On 22nd of January, Mr. Ian White, who's one of our members, who's very much into real ale and real cider, he's having his annual wassailing ceremony at an allotment near where he lives. Details are in the magazine, Walter's Ways, where he lives. It involves a delightfully pagan ritual, making a lot of noise, pouring a libation of cider onto the roots of the apple trees, and then drinking lots of cider. Which is now monthly, on the third Wednesday of every night. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Adi, who's going to tell us all about lutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you very much. I will try to be very clear because the lute is an instrument that is well known in certain circles, but still has an air of mystery for majority of people. And it is this beautiful painting behind me. You can see the angel playing, because in the most common iconography, the lute played by an angel, it brings you towards the greatness of God and the beauty of a paradise. But clearly, this is one of the first images we have of the instrument. But the lute has a story very, very complex. Here we have a scheme of what actually you needed to do to build an instrument. Bear in mind that this is a version of the lute around the Renaissance, around the end of the 15th century. But the lute in itself is an instrument with much more age and mystery. We do not know how the lute, as we know, arrived in Europe. We can only suppose it was during the invasion of the Moors in Spain at the beginning of the 11th century, because the lute is somehow related the transformation of the oud that is still in use in North Africa and certain countries on the Middle East. The oud take the name of my Arabic is very minimal, but al-oud means the wood one, because to describe that he has a base, around the base, as you can see around here, made in this very thin strips of wood that they could create the harmonic body of the instrument. For the Arabs word, the alud is considered the prince of the instrument. The actual name is Amir Alud, the best. But anyway, in the 11th century, 12th century, it started to develop in Europe, and we know that in the 13th century, to be able to play the lute in a version that is quite different than this one, I'll show you, bear with me, I'll get to the medieval version, sorry, so many images. Right, this one is a slightly similar to what the medieval lute used to be, because it had a smaller body, 6 B chords, because the lute, people think, oh, it's tuned like a guitar. It is not. The guitar and the lute, they are not related whatsoever. It's a very severe misconception that for us Lutenists is irking us back, because the lute is composed, the medieval one, of 5 B chords, so 2 strings next to each other, tightly fixed with the keys, and a bass one. This is the medieval instrument that it was used, as I say, in the courts. Basically the most, I would say, genteel people, including the kings and aristocracy, they were very good player of lute. One of the most famous in the 13th century was Prince Manfred of Hohenstaufen, the son of Frederick the Redbeard. Sorry, yeah. That during his captivity in Bologna composed a lot of music, but unfortunately no one has a trace, because at the time music was played not on, as we do now, on a script, but just by ear. So anyway, this is a beautiful figure, a lady playing the lute. And here, very important, we have the witness of one of the first example of tablatura. Because the lute, obviously, everything is easy like other instrument. Lutenists start to write down in the 16th century the music in this kind of system using hexagram, so 6 lines, you know, one more of the pentagram they use in modern days, using different system. We have a different school of tablatura notation. The Italian using numbers on the lines and representing where the finger has to stay on the frets and so on. The French using letter A, B, C, D. The German, more complicated, they use both a mixture between letters and numbers, but no lines. So believe me, study, you know, German composer is like quite difficult. Anyway, stepping back on this, talking back again, I'm a little bit of a dinosaur. Okay, this is one, as I mentioned, where you can see very clearly how the classic lute Renaissance should have been made. We have 12, you know, traditionally you have a 12 piece of wood, giving this rounded shape, and inside there are basically strips of paper to keep the wood together, and they attach it to the neck, and the part of the neck where we have the bottom of the keys, where the strings are tied. Now, strings, that for lutenist is one of the bane that we carry on for life, because if you are a proper lutenist, you try to use catgut like in the medieval and Renaissance times. And catgut gives us very particular sound, very genteel, absolutely unique, that metal modern plastic strings they don't give you. So we have to consider this, that when you have the keys and etc. and the catgut, they tend to come off, and you need it basically even during a piece, you need to retune it because it loses the tension. But at the same time, give this instrument this most amazing, beautiful, uniqueness. So, carry on. Here we have another beautiful example. This is probably one of the first, because as you can see, a 1480 fresco, where you can see a crossover between the medieval and the Renaissance lute. What is the difference? As I mentioned earlier, the medieval lute used to be extremely small compared to the Renaissance one. Also here, even if it's not very clear detectable, the strings are more than 6, they are 8, because around that time another set of string B chords were added. They were basically to allow male voices, more bass, to have like the possibility to perform and to sing, because it was at the time that the lute started to be used by the wandering minstrels, when before it was a little bit more only for the upper classes and etc. So this is the first depiction of a crossover lute. As you can see also in the middle on the rose, we have still a motifs that is very Arabic type, very Moorish. Even if it was like, as you can see, this fresco is in Rome, but the evolution of the instrument can be varied and sometimes very difficult to trace and so on. Now, this is the detail, but as you can see, it's not very clear for me because I think I messed up the image. Sorry. We just saw now. As you can see here, the rose is different again. It changed because also we think we're not certain that each maître luthier had their own way to create their own symbol, to leave their imprint in the rose. Now this is a video, if I can make it play, of a medieval lute. This chap is a Beppe Frana, is one of the most accomplished Italian lutenists. And he has a huge collection, and this lute is clearly still showing a Moorish influence, as you can see.
Do you want me to play?
Yes, please.
Link it play. Link it play.
No, he doesn't play. But anyway, because obviously, even in the music, not only the shape of the instrument, also the music is detectably different in the century. The music in medieval time was moved by certain very, how can I say, early type of very. This is a painting that I adore because it is a portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi, very famous Renaissance artist, and she was also an accomplished lutenist. And here you can see a Renaissance lute, as I mentioned earlier, larger and beautiful portrait, but depicted the woman that she was very accomplished in the arts because. One a little bit more above the everyday life. So this is a very important from the female point of view because she has this gaze to say, hey, I'm an artist, I'm a woman, and I don't care about what else, I'm an artist, full 100%. The type of the roses, they are like, every lute basically, you can recognize from the matte they come from. Shortly, I think is going to be the next. Here we are again. This is another video, but probably will not be able to play. Choose this because here we have an ensemble currently performing in Spain with a Renaissance lute that is a crossover between the lute as we know and what is the lute in Spain. Because in Spain the lute changes slightly shape and become more guitar-like, not a guitar, but similar shape, still rounded at the back, and known as a vihuela. The Spanish Renaissance lute, or vihuela, was used in a different type of music. You can have a sort of, you can recognize the various schools. The Italian, the Renaissance music is very relaxed, very genteel, very soft. The Spanish is more zesty, more flamboyant, and etc. But shame it doesn't work. But vihuela is still in use quite a lot in ensemble music, more than the single lute. Because other things we have to say, the lute is the kind of instrument that if you play here at the end of the corridor, you will not be able to hear it because it's very soft and intended to disappear in the space. So now this is another beautiful image of a lutenist. Even if this chap depicted by Frans van Hals is smiling, etc. Believe me, if you are a lutenist, you never smile like that because every 3 minutes, 4 minutes, you need to stop and retune your instrument. This is a Renaissance, very late Flemish instrument that is start to have a very particular, particular detail because the neck is slightly shorter than the Renaissance European and especially Italian one. At the time, the master of luthier, master of the lutenists were in Germany. A group of, I think there were 3 brothers called Tiefenbrücher, that they created the most beautiful, absolutely incredible instrument, some of which are still kept in some museum. The most famous is in Florence, in the museum, I think it's the Bargello, I'm not 100% sure of the name, sorry, my apologies. But it is very important because that Tiefenbrücher, when it was restored recently, maybe 20 years ago, they realized that the paper, keeping the slotting together, there were pages of one of the earliest, for maybe not the first, but definitely nearby, Bible by Gutenberg. So you have the most beautiful instrument that is still played beautifully, with inside pages from the first ever printed book with a mobile character inside, and it's an absolute jewel. And to be able to hold it, not to play because only very few people they're allowed to play and perform, but is one of the most incredible experiences. Another Tiefenbrücker, not 100% sure because it's never been dated, but just a study of the rose, is the one kept in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And it is not far from the famous Stradivari, the Messiah. And it's very sad because, like the Messiah, this violin, Tiefenbrücker or not being played, is dying. Because it's something that this instrument they always have, especially from the Renaissance and after, they needed to be played not like the medieval ones standing, like the minstrel playing like this. The Renaissance and the Baroque, you needed to sit down and you hug the instrument. So the body temperature helped the wood to contract and give it this beautiful round and incredible soft sound. So to be kept in a case, and a glass case, means it's gonna die if it's not dead already. Anyway, again, I was mentioned the detail, the rose. This is another depiction of a lute, more complicated as a construction. Probably an instrument like this never existed, it's only probably pictorial. But in the 16th century, we start to move from the classic production of lute with the 12 and, change, getting some sort of a more expanded, body. But these are, I suppose it never existed because it's too many, and they will never be able to play nicely. But what are very important is for me, because this is related to Vincenzo Galilei. Does it remind you something, the name?
Yeah.
Vincenzo Galilei. Yes, it was his father. His father was the most accomplished and most delicate composer. His work at the Fronimo, that was published in Venice in the mid of the century, is one of the most beautiful work you can find. And again, that should. Sorry, I think I eliminated the video on this one because it was very, not very good to play. Anyway, so here we have the depiction of the most common and elegant instrument that the genteel classes they would have in their houses at the time: the lute, the spinetta, or clavichord. But no, in UK it's called virginal. Thank you very much. And the most important, the sign of the glass hour, because the lute, like a majority of other instruments, but mostly the lute, has a very intense symbology in those days. And the glass hour means, it's the cinema of the time that go by, that you lose it, You need to be always in constant reminder that life is ready to be kind of snuffed. Quite apt these days with the pandemic, don't you think? But anyway, again, another example, not very clear, of tabulatura. There is another esagram, probably Italian, because you can see the numbers sort of. I forgot to say that the lute in the neck has this. First and foremost, you play the lute on, sitting down on your lap. You play your small finger on the board, and you keep playing with the B chord with your right hand, and on the neck with your left. Now, something that you never find a lutenist, especially female lutenist, with nail, because to be able to play the chord, the B chord, you need to play with this part of the finger, so no nail whatsoever. At the moment, my nails are too long to play. And so something that you have to bear in mind, that you will never ever find a lutenist with decent hands. So anyway, other beautiful image here of a lute much later, with the usual instrument that were fashionable at the time. First of all, this is a Caravaggio. Again, the face of the player is a little bit more apt for a lutenist because he's not exactly happy, because I probably think something go wrong. But anyway, no, seriously, because the catgut that was used at the time, obviously, catgut, as you know, is the intestine of the sheep. To be able to make a string that is the right thickness is extremely laborious and extremely complicated, because you can end up with one end very thin and the other chunkier. So you never be able to find. So you need to work and to pull it until you get the right thickness for the right chord that you want to sound you want to get. And bear in mind you have to play both at the same time, at the same thickness. Don't forget they tend to snap. And one of the most common injuries when, especially in these days, when you use both the cut with even the metal one or the plastic, they snap. You get during the concert, you get hit by the string. But yes, that is a part you can expect. Here you can see the instrument that they were very common at the time: the viola, the very small, the flute, the recorder we call flauto, and the little virgin. This is very common portable instrument that was very fashionable in the upper classes. Very difficult to play because of the keys that were really small. Something else also very interesting here is one of the first depictions the Caravaggio makes on the bow. Now we imagine the bow in this shape, but prior to that, the bow was literally bowed. You know, when you play the violin on the viola, it used to be like this. I used to play with this arch and the strings, and the horsehair, you know, they used to be very, how can I say, stinky, because the best horsehair to use on the bowl, they were basically there to be soaked for a long time in horse urine. So, believe me, very unpleasant. Something also I forgot to mention, and that is big my mistake. When I mentioned the medieval lute, I forgot to say that the lute they used to be played with a quill, like a plectrum, plucked. Only in the Renaissance, which they realized they could play with a finger. Before they used to play with the plectrum, with a feather like this, with this part. And there are depiction where you can see the people playing like this. But anyway, sorry, my mistake. Forgot. It's only in the probably around early 1400 they start to use the fingers. Not mine, because I can't play anymore. But anyway, this you can add the depiction of the lovely tablatura. This is again the beautiful example of a lute that probably didn't exist made like that, but it looks good on painting. This is basically 1650. Now in 1650 we had to realize that until then music was kept like a secret. Nothing was written. Only around early 1600 the book of written notation like the one we saw start to appear. Before, everything was passed by the teacher to the pupil, and that's it. Nothing else. Only one of the first recorded books for notation and instruction how to play is by Francesco da Milano. Francesco Capirola is another one in around 1581. But we don't have a volume. There is only some pages, some leaf left in some library. I think it's in the Marciana in Venice, by Capirola. And Francesco da Milano is the first one in around 1600 that he started actually to write down, because he was kept, to be a lutenist, to be able to play was a synonymous of something extremely precious, not to be shared with the others, very jealous. Also, to be a lutenist gave access to, to courts and so forth. One of the most famous Italian lutenists, even if he acted as a secretary, was Davide Rizzio. They became the secretary and favorite musician of Mary Queen of Scots, that he was barbarically killed, allegedly, whatever, etc., etc. But yes. Again, stepping back on the symbology, this is one of the most famous paintings with the lute that is kept in the National Gallery by Hans Holbein, the ambassadors, that probably you know very well. And apart from the skull appearing, designing the memento mori, remember you're gonna die, is the fact that the symbology here is very clear. The lute here is represented with a couple of strings ripped, and this represents discord, because the legend goes that these two gentlemen, these ambassadors, they were, yes, friends, but they were actually having some issues. So Holbein, using this little trick, try to remember that life is not only transient, but it goes also through phases where you can have like contrast with people. So this is one of the most beautiful representation of the lute, and as you can see, this is very philologically correct. Where you have like if you count it, they come up with 12. Because chitarrone romano. The lute here has 8 B chords. The chitarrone here, as you can see, has a double neck because it becomes more and more desirable to have an instrument with more and more strings that to give a different range of sounds. So the chitarrone, or theorbo as it's called in circle even today, has a double neck, and the player plays only with the strings attached to the smaller neck, and the other one play by sympathy. The vibration makes play all the others, and it is quite. It's a very beautiful instrument. The best player at the moment is a chap called Peter Martins that just left London with his collection. That is a huge, fantastic collection of lutes and theorbos, and valuable knowledge. And here we have the depiction at the time. These are modern instruments, but these are depiction of the theorbos, chitarrone romano, on the left, and the smaller version called the Paduano theorbo, that is a shorter, but it's different complex. The chords go tied in a different way. Very difficult instrument, very similar to the French theorbo. They reaches the absolute aberrant number of 14 B chords, and is one of the most difficult instruments to play. Frankly, not very good sound, but people like it. I think the beauty of the Renaissance lute gets lost during the Baroque times because too much gets to even if it's very pleasant, but still I'm very fond only of this version than this. Now, this theorbo, Roman theorbo, as I said, and the Paduan. Bear in mind that the neck in some of the most famous theorbos reach nearly 2 meters long. So imagine to go out on the tuba today with an instrument this nature, as Peter Martin does. It can be quite a task. But anyway, now, what I've done? This is an example of notation, tabulature. These are what we know now, the pentagram with the note notation, as we know, with the different scale and etc. Here we have an example of the German one, the most hated and difficult for beginners, or even for a professional now still, because the music for lute developed in Germany is a very beautiful, very stern, but absolutely delightful. But believe me, to learn how to play on this, to read this, is like, ooh. Anyway, and above you have all the other ones, different types, the French, and I believe this is, this is the Italian, no, the Italian one. No, the Italian is the top one. But as you can see, if you are a proper lutenist, you like to play, not using the hexagram that you can find easily because everybody knows the music, but you want to, the finery is to be able to master the various system, the various tablature for each specific piece or author. Okay, now we go back to, you say, we've been talking about the evolution during the centuries. I haven't mentioned a composer apart from Galilei and Capirola and da Milano. Obviously, the various countries where the lute was in use for centuries and centuries, they have their own characteristics, their own schools and so forth. In Germany we have, as I mentioned earlier, this very stern but beautiful. The most important German composer, I would say, that is in the early 1700s is Bach, obviously. They compose quite a lot for lute. When instead, I have to make a paragraph for specific in the UK. In England, the lute was in use in the court, especially in the Tudor times. Richard III of Plantagenet was known to be a famous lutenist, but we don't have any images, no any, nothing written. It's only in the legend. Henry Tudor, Henry VIII, he was an accomplished lutenist, as he was his daughter. Legend says that Henry composed one of the most famous chansons called Pastime with Good Companies, even if really they say there was not actually him, even if he was a good player, but apparently it was someone else composing the lyric and etc. We know that he loved to sing and perform on the lute. Green sleeves was his favorite. He dedicated quite a lot to his various wives, but even Elizabeth was an accomplished lutenist, because at the time the most famous composer, it was this Irish gentleman called John Dolan, that is an absolutely, is a gem. The work is suggested to check even on YouTube or get a CD of John Dolan, Lacrime, or The Pavane for a Lady, My Lady's Sorrow. Absolutely beautiful, because as I mentioned earlier, the lute has been always used to represent the music of the highest, for God, or for love, because the lute is famous to be used in during the century to sing of love, love lost, love sufferings, and etc. John Dolan is become the perfection on this style. At the end, I have, but it doesn't work unfortunately, but I warmly recommend to check for this little track called Come Again by John Dolan, one of the most beautiful ever composed. In the last 100 years, the lute resurrected, because after the 1750, music started to take a different direction. The lute was still in use, but the keyboard became more and more fashionable. So the lute was, as someone said, an author, Detelus said in 1550, that in Paris there was only 3 elder gentlemen able still to play the lute, because nobody was interested anymore. So for nearly 150 to 200 years, the lute became like dormant, until the beginning of the 1900s, when, thanks to various reasons, people start to discover so-called early music. In this country, we have to say thanks to a French gentleman called Alfred Dolmesch, that started to collect what he was left and rebuild in his workshop in Haslemere lute and other early instruments like viola or violon and other instruments, sitar and so forth. And thanks to him, the resurgence of the lute began. In the rest of the Europe, the lute was rediscovered, probably more important in Germany, in so-called the Van der Vogel, the group of sort of Boy Scouts. They used to gather together and they were trying to recuperate the folk and the ancient music of the Teutonic tradition. Unfortunately, during the war, they got involved in more political, so leave it aside. But at the beginning, the 20s and 30s, there were a group of people. They were like boys and girls. They were treated as equal, and they were trying to restore the tradition of their country and recuperate all the songs and so forth. But after that, this movement sort of gave the imprint to what is become in the 60s and 70s the hippie movement. They had this lifestyle that wanted to get back to nature and so forth. So this Van der Vogel, they gave the boost for in the 70s, especially, I repeat, in this country and in the States, with the early music. We had with the Renaissance band like the Amazing Blondell and a few others, and the lute, bing, come back again. And in the last 20 years, the lute, thanks to the fabulous work of the Lute Society in UK, they start to gather momentum, and the study of the lute and the music, and there are around 25,000 pieces of still existing in various sheets and etc. of lute music from the Renaissance, and similar for the Baroque period. So there is quite a wealth of pieces you can study, you can work. And I would say that if you're a lutenist, you choose your instrument, because if you like medieval or Renaissance, you will never play with a Baroque instrument, because you will never be able, because the music is written for different string and etc. So, but that is a personal choices. And the lute, I will say here, start to get more and more popular, because in 2013 Jim Jarmusch made this movie that I recommend called Only Lovers Left Alive, where the protagonist Tom Hiddleston plays Adam the vampire, and he plays this most amazing example of lute. This is actually was made by a maître luthier, Simon Barber, that passed away a couple of years ago. They used to be based in London. It was made specifically for this one. And people start to get back interested in this, because they were, I don't know if they fancy Tom Hiddleston or the vampire story, but yes, that is becoming more and more common thanks to that. Or in 2006 album, Sting, the rock man, decided that he wanted to do something different, and he joined the Lute Society. He purchased a large number of instruments from medieval, Renaissance, Baroque and Theorbo. And he learned, and don't get me wrong, he's a quite good player, but please don't make him sing, because his voice, it is not a voice for lute music, because it is, well, matter of taste, but believe me, Barbara heard him, and trust me, it's like no much of... And anyway, so thanks to him, the lute was presenting some sort of event in front of the Queen and so forth, and he started to get him out and about again. As you can see, this Rosone here is a different one. I'm not 100% sure who's the maître luthier of this Theorbo, that is a short neck French style, as you can see. And as you can see, he plays the chord, and even if it looks like, this is it looks like a proper Theorbo, but this has been strung as a guitar. It's an aberration. It never had to be like that, because I repeat, a lot of people that get into the lute these days, they are disgruntled or guitarist, the guitar player, they won't try to do something, and so these kind of things start to appear, but they are not the correct one, the correct stringing and so forth. But anyway, everyone likes it. So, you try to, to resurface, like in this case, John Dolan, but, This is the Edin Karamazov, that is an excellent artist on his own accord, that he collaborated with Sting, as you can see. This is supposed to be the video only. And this is the picture of Sting with his beloved wife. And I was like to say, with the Theorbo. I'm not going to say someone chose this image, but I thought it was very amusing, But I stopped there.
Quite disturbing, actually.
Well.
Is that an authentic dress for the period?
No comment. I had to say,
She looks a little underdressed, surely, after dinner.
It's overdressed for younger.
I have to say, Sting.
Going to bed, actually.
Does she have-
I think she is overdressed.
What's she wearing on her wrist? Is she wearing armour?
Braces, yes.
Well, they try to get this very, very medieval type, and again, it's a complete wrong, because if you go to medieval, you don't get the gloomy Theorbo with the guitar, stringing and so forth,
But they're having fun.
Well, they made a lot of money as well, because he sold quite a lot of albums, and anyway. This is the lute in these days, as you can see, with this beautiful, correct Renaissance styled, and you can see front and back like a proper model. And as you can see, the fret here, without knocking down, here they're fitted, they are no moving. In the old days, this fret, they used to be regulated depending on the sound you want to achieve and etc. But this is a beautiful instrument. I think I can't remember. Do you remember the name? The old maître luthier made. Someone in Cheshire. I think it's the chap that he died actually. Anyway, this is what a modern lute you can have now. Bear in mind that if you want to play lute, you can actually buy kit and make your own one. There are different possibilities, but believe me, it is no easy as it sounds to make a lute. Because personally, as I said, I've been playing lute. I give up violin because I fell in love with the lute many, many years ago, and for nearly, I would say, a good part of 40 years. I still have an issue stringing because here is very difficult and complicated. You need to be very patient and so forth. Even just to retune it with the keys. You know, when you start to get tuk tuk.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Adrienne, is the Theorbo later or earlier than
The
the
Theorbo, yeah, the Theorbo is a Baroque invention. It was created around the 1650, 1670 onwards. The Theorbo is started to be, we call it the aberration. Not aberration in the sense of, but, you know, give an idea because you get more and more big chord to give more possibility for male voices, castrato voices as well.
Is it louder?
No. The Theorbo, all the instruments, because you know, when you have the guitar, for example, or the other flat instrument, the sound reverberates in a different way. When it's round, it goes, the vibration goes in the body of the, you know, the back, and it takes a different, I don't know, how can I describe it? I wish I was able to bring my own one that is not being strung, but it's a totally different sound. And I never play a guitar myself. I don't even know where to start to play guitar because I never touched the darn thing. But with the lute, it's difficult to say. It's absolutely, I don't know. It's like to take a step back in time. It's engulf you, especially when you have this contact and you play. You know, when you play violin, it's become part of you. You play, the violin is your extension. With the lute, it's a similar concept because you become one. It's like a hugging. It's like to holding a child, and you become part of the instrument. Become part of you. I don't know if it's the same with the guitar, so I don't really say because I never play. But totally different sound, different, I suppose, feeling. You know. And again, because those keys, they tend to, you can hear when they start to do this sound like clunk, clunk, and you know, okay, stop and retune it again, bling, 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 do it again. And you cannot tune it like the guitar or other instrument, even the violin, you cannot do this, use the same retuning like a violin or the viola, you know, on this. Is unique.
There's no gearing on the knobs.
No, you need it to be, it
They're not
goes.
just have invented that.
Yeah, I
All
don't think you
knobs
will.
go around.
Well, they change and evolving, as Trevor said. The Theorbo change. Theorbo give a different. You know, when you have a 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 big chord, you know, change completely the sound and etc. But the keys, the tuning, is a century-old problem. Never change. If you go to a lute concert, even the most accomplished master, I don't know, Sandro Volta, they used to be the most famous player. Even Julian Bream, that is another guy that I forgot to mention it because after Alfred Dolmesch, Julian Bream, that used to be a guitarist, is the one that they reintroduced the lute in late 50, early 60. And I had the honor to see him because I was a member of the Lute Society. He passed away last year, very ancient man. But his playing, his sound, what he used to get from, even him had a decision. During performance, he had to stop, start to tune it again. And so if someone like Julian Bream was able to, you know, to get to this, in certain ensemble group like Les Arts Florissants or les Consorts du Roi, or other group that they use widely, the Renaissance lute, they tended to get minimized because you had the other instrument, so they tended to hide when this is happened, but it does happen, you know. But it's like never, and I don't think you want to change it because it's a part of the fun to have this issue, you know. And the instrument, mine at the moment, is sitting wrapped in a blanket, an embroidered Indian blanket that I have on top of a wardrobe because it's not been strung, and also I have some little cracks. Because something I have to say that I forgot to mention, the lute, even if it look big, is extremely light. Literally, you can hold an instrument like this. Even with my wrong finger that I don't have any sensation, I can hold the neck and the instrument because it's so light that is incredible. It's like a feather, and but it's prone to damages. And one of the most common problems is that the back they start to get undone, so they need to be restored and re-glued together. You know, the neck in itself is strong, but it's this part here that is very delicate. And mine has a couple of cracks. And most important, I needed to restring it because I've not been able to do it. You know, I have the set somewhere in the house, but you know, and also, as someone say, "Oh, you got the lute tonight," I said, I was thinking to bring it, but because my lute is a Renaissance one, so it's pretty large, not small like medieval, and my carrier box is tailor-made for this instrument. It looks like a coffin. And the few times I had to go to the Lute Society meeting or gathering that we do now and then, you know, socially, pre-COVID, people literally look at me like I'm carrying a coffin with a child inside. And believe me, it's not. I actually got stopped. I said, "What have you got in there?" I said, "Oh, it's an instrument." "It's a coffin!" And it's not, but because it's been made specifically in the probably 1960 by some hippie or something, it looked like a coffin. One day I'm going to delight you with it when I get it strung, because at the moment the chap that needed to do the restoration and the restrung in mine is a little bit unreliable. So, and because with my finger I cannot do it, I cannot put the tension and etc. Especially on the base here, it's very tricky because you need to go in and fix it with a tiny knot to cut, you know. This is what the lute would inspire. This is the duet, classic Vanitas from the Flemish sound and so forth. So I wanted to finish, you know, with this image of joy and to say, if you don't know the instrument, have a look, play lute. Please don't check first sting because it will put you off forever. But get all the great master. And see, this is the one I wanted to play at the end. This is John Dole, Come Again, one of the most beautiful, both musically and lyrically, poem. John Doland. Come Again.
No, this is Lacrime.
No, Lacrime, no, choose this one because Lacrime, you see, this is another, it's a beautiful piece, but Lacrime is extremely sad because it's the story of a torment of unrequited love. This as well is unrequited love, but it's more cheerful, is more open to hope, more open to, as the lyric says, something. You know, the voice is here is more powerful than actual instrument.
Yeah, it's too loud, isn't it?
Was that shot?
No, it's not the monster. This is the chap called, I can't remember, it's a different one. It's a good version because also, don't forget, this is an ensemble. But this is as an ensemble, as a viola. Can I show you? The one I was going to use is this. Hold on. Yes, good.
Request that perhaps a couple of the links to your videos.
Of course.
On the club.
Of course I will. Listen to me. Can you hear the loop?
It's very soft, as you say.
No, tremor!
But it's definitely got less twangy sound than the guitar.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I don't understand anything about music, but it's a soft
The
sound.
lute nothing to do with the guitar, and I know a lot of guitar players, they say, oh, the guitar is bad. No, it is not. They're totally different. The sound is totally completely, not only because the difficulty to play, bear in mind that, again, I repeat, at the moment I got long nail, but literally to play, also because the vibration of the string on the fret and on the neck give it a specific sound is something that literally is. I remember the first time I studied violin. I was around my 8th year, and someone invited me to a concert, and there was this lady sang an aria from the 13th century, so very, very sad. And oh my God, the sound of this instrument. I remember it was like fell in love at the first 2 bars, you know. And I become obsessed, and because lute at the time it was not very easy to find, and I put my parents really quite a nightmare because I wanted the instrument, and obviously because I decided to carry on. I did 9 years the following year at the conservatoire in violin, but after that I said no, I want to do early music. I want to play lute, and there was incompatibility between the two, and the conservatoire in Genoa didn't have the lute, so I had to register with the Verona, and I had to give up one, and I give up. I was at the end of my study, another year, become a qualified violinist, whatever. But the lute, oh my God, is a very, as someone described, actually here, Shakespeare talking about, they wrote in Much Ado About Nothing. I had to read it because I will never remember. Now divine ire, now is his soul's ravished. Is it not strange that sheep's guts should hail souls out of men's bodies? Because literally it takes you another dimension. The sound of an ensemble or the single lute, even without the voice, the song, just the play, is another dimension. And I warmly recommend. I will send you some link. I'm gonna send it to Clayton, something with the best choice of instrument. But it's an instrument that we are sort of jealous of as it used to be in the past centuries. But it's good to share because it's one of the most beautiful ever experience to have, to listen to ever. The reason why the angels always play lute, because it takes it to different dimension. If you have a man or a young girl playing the lute, is romantic. If you have an old man playing lute, is that to be more lascivious and more, not very, very considered elegant. There are some depictions.
You're saying it's a young man's game.
The symbology, you see, the symbology is if you have a young man or a young girl represent the purity of love, because the sound, it takes it to certain feelings. But there are some critics that say to see older men, especially in a sort of that is but please do, and as I said, I don't know if it takes us to the cherubs or to the type of strong female as Artemisia Gentileschi or Franz Hals, but the lute is the most incredible instrument that I warmly recommend to look up, and try to discover a different word. You don't need to dress like medieval gowns, but it will help. Yes.
You mentioned about the tablatura, and I was most interested, I think, and I could be wrong here, but I seem to recall when I visited Rathbone Castle a few years ago, there's a chemist's off to one side, and in the chemist there's a very interesting little side room where they've got a shell hole from the Second World War, and fortunately everything survived. And in there is a manuscript, if I recall, from about the 11th century, which shows original use of the tablatura. Now, of course, you mentioned there's the lute tablatura, and there are others. And what I was wondering is the lute tablatura different, a different evolution to general music tablatura? And that's why we see the tablatura appearing much later, 400 years later.
Well, what's happened is this, because the first type of music and etc., they use what is called the chironomic movement, the hands, what the conductor do still now, like in the Gregorian experience, as you mentioned during the last lecture talk, is representing the up and down of the voice, monodic. If you take the great magister of the school, della Scuola di Notre Dame, the Magister Perotinus, they've been written down well after they were composed, because for a long time, like literature, was oral transmission. So when you mentioned to say 11th century tablatura, I make my ear go zzz, because the earliest example of notation chironomic or notation such with the neumi, the so-called neumi, that is the first type of notation ever recorded, and they are kept in the St. Gallen St Gallen Monastery in Switzerland. They've been written, well, say 100, 150, 200 years after they were actually composed, and because we know the certain form of music they existed, they've been composed and etc. because of the tradition of the monks, but there was nothing so early. So the reason why you say 11th century, 12th century, I'm like, there is nothing on the medieval music in a parchment or even on the manuscript, you know.
Sorry, if you understand correctly, you're saying it may be an 11th century tune,
Not only that,
notated later.
Yeah. But not even that. In the 11th century, I don't think my knowledge, maybe I'm not,
Obviously, I must miss your call.
but I will be very interested in it.
I will attempt to look up the pictures.
Please
if
do.
If you send Clayton the email of the links, then hopefully that will trigger my memory, and I will try and look them up for you, because I actually have photographs of them.
I will be very, very interested, because not for myself, but I know musicologists, even the Lute Society, or lots of people they are into. I know that there are at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. I've seen some manuscript where there are, but they are much later. There are notation with Naomi, but around 1470, 1460,
I am no
70.
expert in notations.
Not either do I, but notation, yeah.
Musical scales and so forth, and I saw that, and I asked people, and they said, yes, this is it. And
I will be delighted to know someone.
I have to say, I was ecstatic to see it. I am not an expert in this area. Absolutely, I'm a scientist, not an artist. And I'm very happy to be corrected.
I'm quite delighted to learn.
I look forward to your correction, because...
No, me. Because I am, as I said, for the lute and violin and etc., I'm not an expert, but I can, 40 years of playing. But this is very interesting because...
what was interesting is that you could see the parallel lines. There were about 5 or 6, if I recall. I can't remember the picture off the top of my head. I'm sorry. It was a few years ago. And you could quite clearly see staves on there as well. There was no treble or bass clef, if I recall, and there were no annotations above or below. It was very simple.
I did a course organized by the Salzburg Conservatoire on translating medieval notation, neonomic notation to current pentagram and etc. And again, I repeated, I remember clearly that the first parchment, the first example of a notation, pneumatic notation, is kept in St Gallen, and it is around the 13th century, and it is a piece of a missa, a mass for, I can't remember exactly which saint, for one of the festivals of the church, and it is pass over centuries in the monastery. Now, something else that come to my mind, but this is something, and take it with a pinch of salt, because something that talking about sleeves and parchment, something was found, a parchment, but again it was around, I think, the 15th century, inside, used to pad a bishop hat, and it is, if I remember reading about, and because it was found in a collection in Reykjavik or something like that, and it was like a song, but I bought this song like a tavern song, that it was found during the restoration of this bishop hat. But at the moment my brain is getting really muddled up. I need to look, probably try to find out more. But the notation, the first, it was like written down, books and etc. We don't have like the manual like we have now. Say, if you want to learn lute, the first things you buy is the Diane Poulton, the Lutenist, and that is the basic. But in those days, until late, very, very late, there was nothing written. If you think, for example, the famous case of, because the music, it was kept very secret. If you think the famous Allegri, the Miserere, nothing for lute, but it was kept completely secret. Only certain people could access. Only Mozart was able to remember, and he wrote it down.
You were only permitted to sing it
at the Sistine Chapel during the Mass of the break of the light, and it was only when Mozart, that he was attending this mass, he wrote it down and he started, the Pope wouldn't believe it because he said, oh, this little boy had done this and that. And nobody would believe it. Only then it started to get written down. I think that it was the first example of written music, and this was at the Mozart time. So Mozart was a child. I think it was 12 when it happened. I don't remember the exact age. Yeah, he just listened for only once the execution of the Missa. Yeah, and he wrote it down. And the Pope was so shocked for this. And he got, yes, well, it didn't exist, but didn't give it the permission to publish the actual composition in perpetuity, in eternum, ad eternum, thanks to him. And there start to get more and more the music. The first great, as I mentioned earlier, the first coded book of lute music was Francesco da Milano in late 1500 in Venice. That's it, because they were kept secret. You pay a teacher, a maestro,
Yeah.
you pay for it and he teaches you how to do it, but you play by ear. You can compose so much, but nothing is written.
Yeah.
Greensleeves, why so famous with the various variations? Because it was passed, and etc. So, but yes, there are certain composers now that they do sort of work in modern lute playing, but believe me, it's not. It's a matter of taste. Personally, I'm very attached to the old school, the old style. Yes.
Does it have anything to do with figured bass? Because I assume it's all about that sort of period, isn't it? Monteverdi, the
Yes.
continuo
Yes.
writing. Presumably, does it work like that, or?
Well,
Intervals
you
of
mentioned
other
Monteverdi. Monteverdi, famous Missa Pape Marcelli, that is the first what he called the Ute do Re Mi Do Sol La, is the start of the notation in the more. In UK, you use the letter A, B, C, whatever, but worldwide you have the Ute Re Mi Fa Sol coming from the Missa Pape Marcelli. It's one of the first example. But again, it was to be able to buy a book of music. You could buy a whole instrument. The cost of the actual manuscript or the book until Gutenberg started to use the press, etc., was exorbitant. Even in monasteries, exactly as I mentioned in St. Gallen, there are certain, but there is not much. The ancient codes, you can have like some codes of music, but it's more first and foremost, it was ecclesiastical, because the majority of the composition that were kept in monasteries where someone could write it down, copying or whatever, but the old church music, as I mentioned earlier, the Wanderer Vögel, they were inspired by the Wanderer minstrel in the medieval time, where they used to literally go down and perform for peanuts, and the lute at the time was used with the tight on the neck, standing. They used to go, and the cost of the actual instrument would be less than the actual manuscript. Books were very, very expensive. So even until probably the 17th century, I think.
To line the lute with pages from the Gutenberg Bible,
Yeah, the Tiefenbrücker
is
violin.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because that would have been fabulously expensive. Each copy of the Gutenberg
Well, no.
Bible.
What's happened probably is this, like the reuse of the manuscript in the hat. Well, in the hat, someone said, I remember this detail. There was like some sort of a joke that someone putting, lining a bishop hat with a bawdy, vulgar, canon song. Because also it's in Old Norse, Gamle Norske is also the reason why I remember this thing. Gamle Norske is probably the early form, it is a reform of Icelandic, the reason why it's still in existence in the hat. But the Gutenberg probably was like, maybe at the time when the Bible became, don't forget that there was a time when the Bible has to written in a certain way, because otherwise it would be considered heretic. Do you understand? There was like, how many books have been destroyed at the time of the dissolution, because they were considered, Catholic, Popist, and etc. So a wealth of knowledge of books, they've been, in this case, maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a Lutheran follower that he considered the Gutenberg Bible too close to Rome, to not worth it, and they use it for some sort of like a scrap of paper.
Or maybe they lined it with the page of the Gutenberg Bible because it is heavenly music?
This it could be because Martin Luther, for example, was an excellent lutenist. He always said that the music opens the mind to God, and all in his family and his wife Catherine and the children, they were absolutely, we know, because reports and etc. Expert lutenist could well be, but we don't know. This is kept in Florence, and when I was doing my course, I helped the restorer. I couldn't play because you're not allowed, even if I tried to. I just held it. It's like it's one of the instruments that it's like in Genoa they have the cannone, the Guarniere del Gesù, owned by Niccolò Paganini, that as a violinist is the Holy Grail. The Messiah that is in Oxford is sad because it's a beautiful instrument, but clearly now you will not play properly. But because nobody can touch it. It's been one of the reasons why it's been left in aeternum at the museum with the proviso they will never be played. So this instrument is dead, like the lute they have in that. But for a musician in Genoa, the cannone, owned by Niccolò Paganini, especially for a violinist, to be able to hold it, is like, you cannot play because only the winner of the Paganini Prize every year is allowed to play. Maxim Vengerov is one of the ones that's been allowed to use it.
Just because what you say, to keep it alive. They
Yeah.
used to sometimes.
No, in Genoa, I tell you, in Genoa, because it is well known that every instrument needed to be played, otherwise it tends to decay, because it needs the body temperature. Don't ask me why, the wood contracts or whatever. I'm not an expert on this, but they need. In Genoa, they have a specialist people. There is a gentleman, regularly. They're strung and they play. But the only person that is officially allowed to play the cannone is in concert after the winner of the Paganini Prize once a year.
My family will all buy it.
Yeah, and I hold it in my hand because I am like the kind of person that, but I couldn't play. I didn't have the bow. But yes, and the Tiefenbrücker to hold. The Tiefenbrücker for me is the holy grail of the lutes because it is the perfection. It's the typical Renaissance lute, beautiful shape, pear shape, beautiful rounded, and is it's the magic. When you mention to a lutenist Tiefenbrücker, yes, you can say Simon Barber, you can say this, you can say that. Mine is probably, I don't know, and I can't remember the name because it's probably minor, but that instrument. To be able, I was tempted, but they were like, you can't touch it, you can't touch it. And it's actually strung with a catgut. So there is also to be very careful because if it's a catgut is decayed, it probably snap and then you will be in trouble. There is a collection in South London, in what is called the museum, not far from where the chap lives. Remember that we went and we saw the museum, Barbara? The ornament. They have a beautiful instrument. I don't know if they play or not. I discovered this when I was talking to Chris Goodwin, that is the secretary of the Lute Society, and he told me that they have a beautiful series of instruments, but they are not open to the public for playing.
On the subject of instruments, boring etymological question. The chitarrone romano.
Yeah.
Are all lutes chitarroni?
They're called chitarroni romani or theorbos, the actual correct name. They're archilute.
Yes, I was
Archilute,
wondering about
archi,
that, yes.
exactly, inflate, archi, bigger.
But are all lutes chitarroni?
Yes, they are considered part of the family of the lute. Everything, the family of the lute is basically goes from the Amir al-Oud, the Arabic. Bear in mind that Amir al-Oud has a smaller neck. The oud has a completely different neck. You see here, the lute has a very long part of the neck where you have the keys. The oud is straighter and is more rounded. It's more like a mandolin. But they're not the same family. The mandolin, totally different.
The thing that interests me is that The kithara, of course, is
Yeah.
the ancient Greek lyre.
Correct.
But these things look nothing like a kithara.
They're-
They look like a chlamys, if anything, which is another sort with a tortoise shell at the bottom.
Correct.
So I wonder, was this terminology arrived out of the Renaissance when they
Well,
were digging up all of this old musical theory? Like
You touch
Vincenzo,
a
if,
good point that I haven't mentioned. The reason why the lute became like so popular in the Renaissance is because the Renaissance, the lute was considered a direct descendant from the cithara and the lyre. That is not at all, because the classics were considered the epitome of knowledge, blah blah blah. But there is no connection whatsoever. The old is the direct closest relative of the lute. The sitar is considered belonging to the lute family as an archilute because it has the stringing with a lot of chords and etc. Even if they are single strings, not bichord. But as I mentioned, we have the archilute or chitarrone originally had a bichord, but there are some experiences like later, like the one the string plays, they have like guitar string. But I still consider a lute, archilute. But I repeat, for the purist, there is a medieval lute and Renaissance lute. After the Baroque lute, John Dolan, etc., they start to get all these various things and etc. But no.
I just wonder if the shape of it could perhaps be related to the old chlamys with the tortoise shell. Because of course there are plenty of links, musical links between India and the East and ancient Greece. I wonder if that was an attempt to replicate it, or perhaps there was just parallel evolution. They came to that shape because it made the sound they wanted to.
Well,
that's the same reason they used the tortoise shell.
Mentioning this, they are representation of virgin followers of the Ishtar cult in Mesopotamia. That they play instrument. They are very similar to the archilute. We don't know what they're from because there are some sort of depiction, but this look like archilutes. And they are the servant, what I call of the Ishtar. But we don't know much, we don't know
Ishtar
existence.
was the goddess of love, and they had sacred worshippers.
Ancient Mesopotamia,
the priest.
yeah.
When they were female, they used to have the
Hold on, maybe I have some note here. Hold on.
sacred prostitution because he was supposed to
Let me see if I got this here.
find the goddess will by doing this.
Similar thing in Carthage, wasn't it? Who was there? I can't remember.
Yeah, well, there are definitely, because don't forget the Carthage is North Africa where the oud.
Yeah, they are coming from,
I don't have it here.
Phoenician.
I don't know they would, but I think it sounds very different,
That's
doesn't
the
it?
issue of sacred prostitution that goes back many thousands of years.
Sounds very
The
different.
Ishtar was the Mesopotamian was in
the
yeah, 3,000 before
No, but in terms of the sound.
And they kept on doing that,
Sound.
even in Phoenician, with the Phoenicians.
There's more of a
So
twang, I believe, doesn't it?
I think they kept on doing that
It doesn't have any of the sweetness of the
Christianity.
Well,
Well, the oud is like, sounds like.
but the oud is still very, still very used now.
I think I've heard it,
it's
but it
next
doesn't sound
week.
very much like
Next week, I think, Luca, there is a gig of this Syrian artist playing oud in London. And I know that we had at the meeting because we meet as a Lute Society, at least twice a year. Well, now it's been very random, but we had a player. I didn't attend that event because I was late, and I missed his performance. But I had this chap from North Africa, I think it was Algerian, playing the lute, and everybody heard their comments. They say it sounds like a medieval lute. Also because, again, I repeated, the medieval lute, unfortunately Pepe Frana, the one I was going to play, the piece is very Arabic type, very very cheerful. Imagine they give you the idea to be in some sort of environment of the Alhambra in Spain, the Moorish area, in the sound, because that. But again, he's like someone we were talking about, the Sumerian. Is exactly the same. For a specific period of time, we can only suppose what the music used to be like. We know what the Moors, because we have still now a certain tradition, but the medieval music, we know the Manfred, von Stauffen used to play, but what he used to play, we don't know. You know, we know the instrument could be like that, but again, it's very arbitrary in a way to depict the instrument as the modern lutenists do. We know they play with a quill because they are painting and so forth, and they're writing, mentioning certain things, certain practice, but they don't tell you how to play with the finger, because they're different school. Because I used to play with this, my small finger, and play and use the middle finger more than everything else. But if you play the quill, you don't use the middle finger, you use just play. You know, that is what they used to be in medieval. Renaissance changed the pluck and use the, So it's very, very arbitrary in a way, until the late 1500s, when the first capirola and Francesco da Milano appeared, and so forth. Ah! Oh, fantastic. This is the medieval one that was said. This is the Maintrud Geselle, that is basically the one that we're supposed to play. Thanks, Barbara. I have to say thanks to Barbara, because she created this presentation. She did everything. She put all together, because I am a dinosaur. As you can see, I can't even use this. But she's done, and thanks to her, this is exactly, I think she deserves, more than me on this. And you find this. Hold on, this is, hold on, listen. Very fast. There is no bass here. It's only the 6B chord. Medieval. Medieval one. Hold on.
It's not really a dance from keyboard music, is it? Virgin music for virgin music.
I got told off for saying that.
I know the sound is different. The sound is different.
But you see, even the instrument, as I say, is very Moorish, except for the neck, that is lute. It could be a oud. Thank you.
But the sound is very different, that's what I'm saying. An oud has a completely different sound.
Well,
Moorish music has such a different sound from... I know basically nothing about the history of music, unlike yourselves, but I always wondered why Middle Eastern, North African music sounds so different from our music. Because you think that's kind of a universal thing, but it's evidently
But it's
not.
also cultural. I think, for example, the great magisters of lute music, they reflect, for example, the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance in Florence, in Venice. They have a specific thing. As I mentioned, John Dola is much later, but it's a very different sound. If you take Spanish music, like the one I was going to play with ensemble, it's very Spanish. You can feel it. If you take Milan, that is the most famous lutenist composer that we know, you can recognize. It's like there is something, that is Spanish. It's really weird. It's very empiric, but it's
it's
always
just like the notes sound different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's radically different.
Yeah.
So, Italian classical music of the 1600s is slightly different from German classical music of the 1600s, but they're using similar instruments, and the notes, to an ignorant ear as mine, sound like they're in the same family. Whereas Indian,
but the signal is totally different.
or
Yeah.
it's just like they're almost like different notes. It's fascinating to me that
They are. The tuning system is
Yeah.
completely different. Yeah.
Well, you're talking about tuning,
sounds quite alien.
tuning the lute, the tuning of the lute, the Renaissance lute and the Baroque, totally different. Because they're different instruments. As I'm saying, of the chord, the strings, the grows. As I said, the medieval had the 6. Actually, there's some of them using a lute, medieval lute with the 5, chords, strings. Sorry, set of string. I call it big chords because they are 2 chords next to each other. And after become 6, that is most common medieval. Renaissance 6 plus 2, the 2 basses, because they were more accompanying the male voice, very basso voce, and so forth. But it's an instrument that there are some modern composers. They compose for medieval, for Renaissance lute. That you think, why? You should be shot. But again, the music is constant. No, seriously, it's like, there is this Norwegian composer that he has. No, not vinyl modern one, because vinyl I'm talking about
the vinyl, the
yeah,
on your lap
yeah.
one. Yeah, right.
Because you're talking about the vinyl like the Marie Marin or the composer, what's his name, the other one, Monsieur de Saint Colombe. Of Le Seigneur de Saint Colombe. Vincenzo Galilei. Oh, honestly, this is the father of the great man. This is the one that created. This was this is the classic Renaissance, Italian Renaissance lute music. Did you hear when they went come off tune? Just that.
What's that, Johnny? Lovely formal counterpoint. It's nothing like a weird and wonderful step you got in England.
You mentioned about the oud. You mentioned about the oud, but as I'm sure you're well aware, there's various styles of North African music.
No, I don't talk about because I never use it. I don't even touch one.
There's Ganal and Berbère. And Berbère is more is African. Ganal is more Arabic in the use of the oud. And you can tell the difference, it's quite easy. The Berbère is very much repetitive, the rhythmic, hypnotic beats.
No, Berberi, because Berberic people are playing that.
Yeah, the Berbère. From the Berbers.
Yeah,
from southern Africa.
Yeah,
from
from
basically, in ancient times, of course, the
Before the
Sahara was a total separator. So you have the African Ganal, and you have the southern, shall we say, African, as in south of the Sahara,
kind of barrier.
and the Ganal is a much more delicate, sophisticated music. I mean, I would strongly urge going to Morocco, and there's an excellent restaurant there, if only
Wow. Well, in those days it would be interesting.
Now it's difficult to travel, but
it's not expensive, but it's absolutely beautiful. By the way, you get excellent cocktails there as well. And they have
So I just get to
excellent Berbère.
March. Thank you. I have to check it because I must admit I never got into the. I know the oud, but I've been a little bit because my love is for the lute. Is my unrequited love, you know. Because believe me, once you get in your blood, the early music is like in every form and everything is like, you know, you can't get stopped. But anyway, sorry, kind of bad. But this is a Spanish lute playing. Very floral, very Spanish. I know this is one piece, but they all have this kind of trace all along.
Is that this in a period?
Well, if I get like the different school.
Very harmonic though, I'm surprised by that. It's very sort of top down and very vertical.
There is a system of a set of music called Passacaglia. What's the name? Sorry. But basically it's like
The folia? The folia?
No,
No,
no.
it sounds more North African to me than
Spanish because
Yeah.
it's more.
But
It's
you
the
know,
time of
I have a CD in Italy.
First time it was called.
Is a Spanish medieval music that is actually more.
yeah.
That is because they had this kind of time where they were,
Where is the
Boh.
camera?
you know, and they were. I mean, they kind of clean after the Reconquista, but the culture was so deep inside for so many centuries that they couldn't get rid of that. So they kept on having this music that was a mix of Arabic and European something, I don't know. It's very special, one of a kind cultures that was in Spain because of the Moorish
Passamezzi.
Ah.
Moorish influence.
Yeah, it's a form typical. That's on it.
Oh, wow, he's gone there, hasn't he? The tunes now.
Anyway, yeah, like a drink.
I presume we've all heard of the tickle fiddle. There was
Sorry?
the tickle fiddle gentleman's club.
I think we can.
Right, thank you very much.
Let's call it a day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to those of you at home if you're still there. I have no idea if the stream worked, but assuming you did, hope you enjoyed it. See you next month. Thank you very much.
Oh, the battery lasted.
Amazing.
Thank you.